Welcome everyone to today's webinar, which is part of the Grand Challenges for Social Work, Harness Technology for Social Good webinar series. The last scheduled one actually, but we hope to add some additional webinars in the fall. The Grand Challenges for Social Work is actually a national initiative that started out of the Academy for Social Work and Social Welfare in about 2016. The Harness Technology for Social Good webinar network, is one of the original 12, and we now have a 13th Grand Challenge on eliminating racism. Each of the networks has a number of co-leads who lead the work and lead the general network structure. You can see the 6 network leads here. And for more information on the individual grand challenges, if you go to our website, you can click around and see more information on each of the networks and what their goals are and what they're working towards. And the grand challenge around harnessing technology is really a big one and multifaceted. It's focused on, technology in multiple different capacities. So looking at big data and looking at identifying ways to incorporate new technologies into our practice, as well as into our research and expanding data access in general. So with that, we've done a number of webinars over the past few months to just sort of look at how technology has been introduced and incorporated into the social work practice and profession. And today's lovely presentation will be looking at virtual reality simulation in child welfare training. We have a few great presenters today who I will pass the baton over to now to begin sharing their information. We have Matt Davis, Chad McDonald, and Christopher. I don't actually know that I've had to say your last name out loud yet, so I might not try it. So I'm going to pass this over to Matt, who will then lead us through today's webinar. Welcome.
All right, I'm going to start up our slide deck here. Make sure I've got screen 2. All right, everyone can see that?
Yes.
Okay. So the title of our presentation today is Developing Evidence-Based Methods for Deliberate Practice of Child Welfare Skills Using Simulation Technology. That is a big mouthful. Hopefully, we'll be able to, by the time you get done, have conveyed what we mean by it. We've already introduced ourselves, so I'm going to just start with a little background about what we're doing. We call this the onion slide, and basically what it is it's not comprehensive, but it's showing the training spectrum, if you will, that we typically, or that we could use to get from low competence to high competence. So over here on the initial learning side, we have the typical things that we use: PowerPoints, watching experts. Sometimes we use vignettes, quizzes, and that's all of the stuff that we typically think of when we're trying to train to competence. And I should point out that when we're talking today, we're talking about training to social work skills, not all the other areas in which a social worker should be able to be competent. We're mostly focused just on skills. So then, in addition, we have initial practice. These are things that you do after you've received your introductory orientation or your school learning, and that can include things such as intensive coaching, peer support, supervision, how-to guides, fidelity checks. You'll see that we've highlighted short skills-focused training sessions. So that's just to reiterate that that's what we're focused on in the training spectrum. And then in addition, you have daily performance of the job, things that we might do there to increase competence is ongoing case consultations, a training resource library, peer support or supervision, and again, fidelity checks. And down here at the bottom, one thing that is probably, it should be in a bigger font because it seems to be the way in which we train people the most, or we spend the most amount of time, is simple experience. So we will be discussing those two areas. Before I go on, Chad, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that's great. I just want to emphasize the point that we recognize that there are many other aspects, like are shown here, of the competence continuum, if you will, and we'll be taking a slice of it through our approach with short skills-focused training.
So we started with the question of, are there more effective, reliable learning strategies for learning skills? In a review of the literature, and this can include things such as psychotherapy or even child welfare skills, what you typically find is that there's not large effects for training. And in addition, there is a big difference between the skills of the best worker and the skills of perhaps the least effective worker.
As a trainer, administrator, supervisor, that sort of thing, I've spent over a decade at the local child welfare agency, and this began to really bother me in terms of, we're getting, in my opinion, a lot of research around effective interventions, if you will, but my attention increasingly was drawn towards the abilities of the workers to carry those effective interventions to in their work with engaging with these families. And as an administrator, I can't tell you how many times I found myself refereeing, if you will, some things that maybe a less experienced worker might not have found themselves in the middle of. And so this led us to trying to figure out how to improve training for these workers so that it wasn't just business as usual and they could have a little bit more chance to gain skill before they're asked to go out and learn on the job. And deliberate practice theory caught our attention. It's, as you might be aware, Erickson's deliberate practice theory, it addresses some of these concerns that we were having when it comes to skill development, and we wondered if we could apply this to child welfare workers. So what you see here is an illustration of the qualitative difference between the course of improvement of expert performance and of everyday activities. The goal for everyday activities is to reach, for example, as rapidly as possible a satisfactory level that is stable and autonomous. Like, we all know that the brain is wanting as quickly as possible to figure something out so it can devote resources somewhere else. So that's why after driving to work every day for 5 years, you start to forget the actual drive to or from work as your thoughts were somewhere else. Maybe you were eating, listening to a podcast, or even doing your makeup or something. So that's something that is become autonomous. This automaticity, however, can arrest our skill trajectory. So after individuals pass through this cognitive and associative phases, they can generate their performance virtually almost automatic, like we said, with this minimal effort. That's that bottom arc there. In contrast, expert performers counteract automaticity by developing increasingly complex mental representations to attain higher levels of control of their performance, and will therefore remain within the cognitive and associative phases. That's the key. And so according to Erickson's deliberate practice theory, there are several key components that facilitate remaining within this phase, the cognitive associative phase, and we've tried to use these components in what we're going to show you today. One of being the target specific limited aspects of a skill, just beyond the current level. If we stay within the current level, that's where automaticity starts to set in. So it has to be just beyond their current level. Go too far beyond, and they're not going to be able to reach. Cognitive load might start to get in the way, and other aspects. These sort of experiences need to occur under guidance of a coach or a teacher. provide frequent feedback for opportunities to consider how maybe you can do it differently, more efficient, more effectively, and repetition, frequent practice, usually daily. So some experts will at some point in their career give up their commitment to seeking excellence and terminate their deliberate practice towards this. But those that don't are the ones that you end up seeing, for example, at the Olympics, some of the best sports players or even expert musicians, chess masters even continue to do this and practice this. Anything else that any of you would add for this?
Nope.
Next slide then. So as I've kind of alluded to, technology's enhanced learning tools, this deliberate practice has been introduced through technology in other industries. One example we commonly use, aviation, is that 70 years ago, you became a pilot if you could successfully lift off the ground and land without something bad happening. And that's kind of where we're at right now in child welfare, for example. Matt said we should highlight the word experience. There's a lot that our workers are going out and actually learning for the first time how to do in the field. And I wonder how that is. I mean, in some regards, our child welfare workers are thought of, I like to think of them anyways, as first responders. I don't know that we would ever want an EMT showing up at my door with an emergency in my home and being, hey, this is my first time here. I'm going to do the best that I can. My first time doing this sort of thing. That would be a little bit unnerving, I think, let alone a pilot never having been in the cockpit with the simulation for thousands of hours prior to getting on the commercial airplane to fly to our vacation destination or what have you. So these sort of technology enhanced learning tools have shown that if done right, they can produce effective skills. And this was our hypothesis with child welfare, the same as they've done in medicine and the military and what have you. So we began this journey towards infusing some deliberate practice elements into how we train our child welfare workers. Next slide.
Yeah, so it's important to, at this point, step back and remind everyone that, as Chad was saying, like, for example, with aviation, pilots can learn how to fly a plane to a level of competence without even leaving the ground at this point. However, it's not the flight simulator. It's not the technology. There's a that makes that difference. There's a quote that Chad and I both like quite a bit. It's by Ruth Clark. She's a well-known training professional. And what she says is for the past 70 years, instructional scientists have tried to say, hey, the next thing, such as computers or PowerPoint or anything that is a technology-based instructional method will have an advantage over classroom instruction. And what the research has conclusively shown is that's not true. Those technological advancements are only more useful and more effective if they take into account explicitly how humans learn. So the psychology of human learning. And that's because oftentimes the technology can overwhelm people. The technology might, a common example people give is when you replicate a book onto a computer, it's actually harder to read. It's harder to scroll through. And so you need to take into account how humans learn, how our memory works. And so that's one of the reasons why we've focused so much on the learning theory and finding a learning theory that would allow us to use technology to remediate some of the issues that we've found with training as usual in social work and specifically child welfare. So what we'd like to do is show you three examples of how we are using deliberate practice to create technologically mediated improvements to training. The first one is feedback enhanced simulation. Most folks maybe on the call either use or are familiar with in-person simulation. So we're just going to briefly touch on how we've tweaked that a little bit. Then in addition, we're going to cover our virtual home simulation and our virtual motivational interviewing app. Before we go into the simulation, just to reiterate, our goal is to create a deliberate practice curriculum which reliably creates competent child welfare workers. Ideally, this would be similar to aviation, where we can have child welfare workers that are competent or achieve a level of competency prior to, as Chad was alluding to, going into people's homes, so that they're not learning on the job, they're learning prior to working on the job. Do you want to take this one,
Sure.
Chad?
Yeah. So this is an image of what our simulation labs were looking like before COVID-19. We would just, this is kind of an example of the living room here, and in an auditorium. Instead of, I know some people use homes, where that's all decked out with their audio visual as well, cameras and microphones. So many of us have had experience with different versions of this. And then there's oftentimes a feedback discussion afterward about some things that can be done. Sometimes that's even semi-structured or structured afterward. However, there were several issues that we were experiencing here in Utah, one of them being this idea that, first of all, to get every new employee through a simulation lab training is very resource heavy. We had to think of a way to maximize a large group interactions instead of just the 2 or 3 at a time that might go through the home, if you will, right? And using deliberate practice, this led us to implementing what we call this observation form, where really what's happening is while we've got several trainers, supervisors, administrators, as well as these new workers in this experience with the simulation lab, every one of them, the trainers and experts, as well as these new employees, have this form in front of them, and we've worked through specifically the behaviors in each segment of this simulation, which we've chunked into 5 or 6 elements. Instead of just a start to finish thing, we've chunked in 5 or 6 elements, behaviors that we expect our workers to demonstrate. All week long, they've been learning through, class lecture, demonstrations, and role plays in the classroom up to this point. And so this is a bit of a culmination of that, as many of you do as well. And the difference is we have 2 workers go on at a time, and while they're going off and preparing for their segment, we're also talking with the group about what they might, what they're supposed to be able to know and do during this next segment. And this form, once the workers get onto the stage, or now that we've gone virtual, we've just across the entire state, when I say virtual, online because of COVID, across the entire state, wherever they're at, these workers, they're up, they follow the script through wherever it's at, and the people who are watching these workers do this, whether in this auditorium or whether online, are filling out this observation form for the behaviors they saw that were demonstrated correctly, that they've been taught should be done during these specific segments. And that's not just it. In order to, one of the key elements to Erickson's deliberate practice theory is feedback. And so you've all been in these sessions where they do something and there's, oh, great job, I could tell, I was in a simulation, an online simulation not too long ago, a mock trial it was, and there were some comments after the workers that they said, wow, you can tell you weren't a new worker, that you've had some experience so far. Well, that is kind and nice to hear. the feedback on that, I think the opportunity was lost somewhat in being able to be specific in what was done right, and what might can be done better to move to the next level of skill in this. And so this form is not only a form that all of them are digitally filling out on their phones, laptops, wherever they're at. It's feeding into a dashboard. If you will, you can go to the next slide, Matt. This dashboard is real time so that all trainers, experts, and those in the room are identifying what they see occur. And then all new workers are also exact same form, but coming from a different angle to be able to compare and contrast them, also identifying the behaviors they see. And this is one example of one specific skill, if you will, of going over the rules and guidelines with the family in their first visit here, and or in an interview. And you can see here the green are the trainers, or the experts in the room, and the blue or the teal are the workers. And what this dashboard does, after each segment, which might last 15, 20 minutes maybe, we pause, we ask everyone to complete their little segment, the dashboard populates, and the trainers know immediately whether there's 10 new workers in the crowd or 60 new workers in the crowd, which we've had both times. This tells the trainers exactly what it gives them a pulse on whether or not the group actually can recognize the behaviors when they were demonstrated on the stage or on the screen or what have you, and gives them some immediate specific information as to where to focus their feedback attention during that brief debriefing after each segment. And you can see here each of the experts, they saw each of these behaviors occur, but not everyone saw them occur other than ignorant interviewer. And that would be an area where there could be some additional need for training and clarity even on the trainer's side. So that's why this is a bilateral feedback loop, because not only are we looking at this dashboard, but every individual that put in their observations sees a summary of their own scores. As we know, the literature shows that after we've taken a test or other things, for example, and we see which ones we've gotten wrong or right, that in and of itself helps to reinforce the learning. And so they're seeing their own summary of their observations against this dashboard, and it's in a personal experience. We're not calling anybody out like, I can't believe you didn't notice these things. Their own personal experience, they get to see exactly what they thought they saw, and then what the group as a whole saw, and then what the trainers saw, which has really elevated our ability to provide meaningful feedback at the end of each of our simulation scenarios, and understanding how we can fine-tune our training to better target the areas that maybe even trainers may not have been able to speak clear enough about, for example. Anything else that any of you would add on this?
I'd just say so. The cool thing about this is that it enables two aspects of deliberate practice, not only the feedback, as Chad's been talking about, but also understanding or under the guidance of a coach or an expert. Because I can see, I get feedback not only on did I do it right or wrong, or how close was I to the best answer, but also how did the coach see it across all of these different areas. When you're doing a simulation, it's real easy to just focus on one or two areas. This makes it so that we're consistent, and the trainers have to go through each single area to make sure that they're focusing on all of them.
And to be clear, again, this is just one, what we call a widget in the dashboard. In a single day of simulation, there are, I don't know, maybe 50 of these, 40 of these, I don't know, that come grouped together. They're only submitting, 6 or 8 times, but then it has several areas of behaviors that we would anticipate to see. So, and I wanted to also mention to those of you, if you have any questions, feel free to place them in the Q&A or raise your hand or what have you, and we'd be happy to answer them along the way. I'd rather this be sort of a personable, conversation with you all instead of just us getting through this information. So feel free to post any questions you might have.
So that was an example of how we're using technology to enable deliberate practice. Now we're going to move to another example, which is a part of a suite of software skills we call the Virtual Social Work Trainer. It's, go ahead, Chad.
Right. And on this, we aim to provide deliberate practice opportunities to learners to track their progress over time in various skills considered core. We refer a lot to child welfare. That's a primary funding source to develop these tools that you're being shown through the Title IV training and education grants. And so core to a child welfare worker's job. And the reason why you see this splash screen is because key, and one thing that sets this apart from many of the other training tools that are leveraged with technology is the ability for this to track their practice sessions and several metrics, which we'll show you here in a minute. We're going to do a video demonstration of this with my wonderful voiceover, which hopefully I can pace myself well enough. So go ahead, Matt, and start that when you're ready.
Okay, here you go.
So this is the first one is the Virtual Home Simulation, or VHS. It was developed by the GAP Lab in partnership with the College of Social Work at the University of Utah here. So when you first launch the software, like I said, you're prompted to log in or sign up with VSWT, the Virtual Social Work Trainer. And once your account is authorized, you will get access to specific features depending on the type of user. So after you log in, you'll be redirected to the main menu. Here you can either resume a previously paused session or even start a new session. For this video, let's take a look at the Simmons level here. So when the scenario begins, you start outside the home. And before entering, you should take a look at the case file. There's a tutorial that we give that this tool automatically walks you through to make sure you understand how to use the tool, shows you how to access this case file. And this is where you can record observations as well, document your overall assessment in the activity record. Once you've read the case file, the child abuse and neglect report, as we call it here in Utah, names of the children, their ages, and the circumstances, adult caregivers, circumstances, why this has come to the attention of DCFS. You can click continue afterward and enter the house by clicking on the front door. And so while we know there are numerous skills required during a home visit, your task in this skill module, VHS, is to observe the home for items that may indicate risk to the children or possible protective factors or protective capacities of the caregivers based on the case circumstances you just read. Once inside, you can look around by moving the mouse or by turning your head in VR. Some areas have an eye icon, as you just saw. Click on them to take a closer look, then where you can also tag them as possible indicators of risk or protective factors. You enter why you think this item indicates a possible risk or protective factor in the rationale below. Or if you're in VR, you click the microphone icon to use speech to text. So then they go through and you can take these pictures all throughout these homes, and they continue to accrue in your observations the tab there. Looking at the refrigerator, we notice what appears to be a chore chart or a calendar of some sort. And we might think this is an indication of caregivers appear to be managing some age-appropriate chores or scheduling, which could be an indication of a protective capacity for them. When you see an icon in the shape of a hand, you can interact with it by clicking, in this case, to open the refrigerator. If, for example, the empty fridge is a concern to you, you might click on it and indicate that it's a risk and why, maybe perhaps concerned with the lack of food given the age and number of children in the home. To move between rooms, you can just you can be sitting at your desk the whole time, even laying on the floor, honestly. You click on that little icon you saw on the floor. And if the room is large enough, you can inspect it from several different angles. Clicking the foot icon below you, you'll notice the navigation aid at the top right also tells you, what rooms you have left that you maybe have not visited in the home yet. Back in the virtual notebook, the observation panel allows you to view previous observations you've made. As you investigate, tag more items, more images will pop up in this panel. Once you complete the assessment, though, you enter your overall thoughts in the activity record tab of your virtual notebook. And this activity record is where you would document your overall assessment of the home, what questions you'll want to clarify or follow up with the caregivers about, what your next steps may be. This documentation format may depend how you, as in your various jurisdictions, might want it to look, which you can guide in your training, of course. Once your activity record is complete, proceed to end session. Here you can view your choices, make changes before you submit it. Once you submit it, you'll receive a performance summary, including a detailed report, which you'll see here. And in this is a summary report, but we'll go to the detailed report first. In this detailed report, you get feedback on your performance as compared to a consensus of experts, including their rationale for items of both risk and protection that were most relevant in case planning. So you immediately are seeing how your choices compare to those of the expert's profile of choice. The summary score, which you're seeing here, shows you the results of the current practice session. And after 3 practice sessions in a home, you'll see a skill level displayed there in the bottom left, where your performance level compares on the trajectory from novice to expert. And as you continue to practice to increase your skill performance level, you'll see an overall skill level indicating your more consistent level of performance across all homes. So that skill level there is a really important aspect. There's some very robust algorithms that are built into this, designed to help us understand how one might be progressing toward getting closer to how experts behave under similar circumstances. So that was a brief demo of the tool. As some of you might have, you can go on to the next slide, Matt. As some of you might have guessed, what is defined as a risk factor or as a protective factor or protective capacity may not be readily available. The tool actually has highlights at any moment. You're like, oh, wait a minute, I need to remember that. You can click on a little eye icon anywhere you're at, and it tells you these definitions. For purposes of these tools, we're taking it from what the Children's Bureau has endorsed as what is defined as a risk factor. These are examples that you can see throughout the different homes that are in VHS, and how one might extrapolate. Now, again, we're cautious to say that there are possible indicators of risk factors or protective factors, things that many of which you want to follow up with the caregivers on, right? Because they may not necessarily mean certainly they are or are not. Next slide, unless any of you have anything you want to add to it. All right. And as you might have noticed, while we recognize protective factors and protective capacities are 2 very distinct ideas, and even in the literature, many of you are probably familiar with the protective factors framework as conditions or attributes of individuals, families, communities, a larger society that mitigate risk and promote healthy development and well-being. There are 6 on the Children's Bureau's. There's some resources that we link to down there that we take from the Children's Bureau to guide us in this. For purpose of this, you'll notice they're both boxed together, protective factors and protective capacities. Just for ease of conversation and flow, we call them both protective factors in certain places, but we don't want to give anyone the impression that we are calling them the wrong thing. Capacities speak more to the caregiver's characteristics directly related to child safety. A caregiver with these characteristics ensures the safety of their child and responds to threats in ways that keep the child safe from harm. So, for example, on the right, ideas of even developmental toys or even protective doorknobs, where the child can't readily exit the home, and children's books and other things that seem to be specific to or to speak to an individual's protective capacity. So there are several different modes that we have been working on. Evaluation mode, where we are actually giving them a random portion of one of the homes right after their tutorial, and then having a period of time where they go off and practice 2, 4, 6 weeks, whatever, and then they come back and do the second part of the initial home they had, and we measure change in skill that has occurred in between. There's also a free practice mode where you can simply go about this home wherever you want, as you're inclined to do, and practice the evaluation of these homes independent of the more structured evaluation mode. The most structured is the coached mode, which is designed to help us. You can go through and you get, instead of feedback like you saw that was at the very end of the single practice session, the coach mode is actually designed to give you feedback at incremental steps along the way. So you can click on an item and see the feedback, but these are all called scaffolds. Go ahead, next.
One thing I would just add before we move on to the next tool that we're developing is sometimes folks look at this and they say, oh, but where are the people? One of the key tenets of deliberate practice is that you focus on one skill at a time, small, short chunks, and that you do it extensively until you've learned it, and then you go on to the next level. So we started with looking at risk and protective factors because we figured that's kind of foundational. It's an easy skill for people to learn. And now in the future, we're going to be starting to add in, engaging and interviewing and things like that with actual people within the virtual reality itself. So Cole Benson is going to describe our next way in which we're incorporating deliberate practice into technology, and that's using an app we call virtual motivational interviewing.
Right. Okay. So thanks, Matt. This is another skills module within our virtual social work trainer developed by us here at the College of Social Work, University of Utah, in conjunction with the GAPS Lab. So this is another module to extensively practice deliberate practice in a mobile app or on your laptop. And this was developed by motivational interview experts as well as experts in the child welfare fields, so that these dialogues you have with to practice motivational interview with the client are realistic that you would have with a youth or a caregiver. And this is done in a way with a coach or an expert that helps guide you, and they provide specific and immediate feedback as you work through it, much like a supervisor or expert could as you're learning to develop your motivational interviewing skills. So just like VHS, we're going to walk through a video that I'm going to voice over so you can get an idea of what this app looks like. And hopefully I can keep pace and answer all your questions. Here is your expert. We'll call her Jane. She's your motivational interview expert, and she's the coach that's going to help guide you through your meeting with the client. So here's our first client. You see they're kind of shocked. They're upset. They came with a problem, and you'll choose your answer of how you want to respond to their dialogue. When you click on it, it highlights gold, and then you press confirm that that's the answer you want to see. So you see they change their response depending on your answer. They have a different emotion, and these are based on the set of emotions by Ekman with the facial features corresponding with that. So you choose your answer, you see how the client responds, and then you also get feedback, whether this was right or wrong. And then you also get feedback as to maybe why this was right or why this was wrong, how you would improve. So you're not just learning how to navigate the tool right or wrong, but you're also learning why you're choosing to have these interactions a different way from an expert MI approach. Hopefully the video will continue here. So as you can see in green, it says excellent response. This is a great way to further change talk if that was your goal. So once you get through the tutorial with the mentor, you'll be prompted to this screen where there's this different chapter menu. In the chapter menu, there's the different chapters of the different aspects of MI, and you can choose the specific micro skill you want to work on. So here we're trying to do furthering change talk. That's a part of MI that we'd want this learner to be practicing. If you're curious what change talk means, you can highlight over the blue, and as you saw there, it gives you the definition, and those are based on the Miller and Rolnick definitions for motivational interviewing. So you're freely to explore the different answers here. So you're clicking right or wrong, and it'll provide you the feedback. You're also able to click go back and reselect a different answer. So you can explore, oh, maybe this one was wrong. I got this feedback from the MI expert. I want to go back and try that again with the feedback. And you see they click here, excellent response, and it tells you why this is the appropriate, not even appropriate, but maybe why it's the best response. Sometimes in MI dealing with a client, there'll be responses that are okay, satisfactory, but there'll also be one that would be even better that might elicit change talk, which is the goal here. So much like the VHS, we're focusing on very small micro skills to really hone those in before we develop further. So here it's just eliciting change talk, and then we'll develop that further to have a whole meeting with the client. In this tool, we have 6 different types of learning questions for different styles of learning. One is coding. This is what you're seeing here. So you'll be provided with a statement from a caregiver, and maybe you're looking for something very specific in this. For example, identify where change talk is in this dialogue. So take these 2 prongs and you'll highlight where you think change talk is. There is a threshold for correctness. We're really just looking for those specific verbs for change talk. So as long as you're highlighting within that, it gives you feedback, either yes, no, good job, here's what you're missing. So you're seeing a few different examples of this, of someone navigating how to choose the target change behavior. So when you're all done, you've completed your lesson, it gives you a score, some points back, and you're able to see your overall score on the lesson. And then you'll come in here on your player or avatar profile, and you'll see your progression of skill acquisition over time, like how well you're developing your skills. And so this is done in a manner with an algorithm. We're tracking how much your skills improving. And so as you're going through the tool, it's progressing with you at your own pace. That's one part of deliberate practice where you're practicing just out of your reach. We're not giving you things that Matt touched on in training that's maybe rudimentary, you already know, you're not enhancing your skills at all, you're getting that arrested development. We're also not throwing the kitchen sink at you and making things that are too difficult. So with this algorithm, you're progressing at your own pace to move towards an expert and enhance your skills.
So we're going to skip a little bit forward because I want to make sure that Chris has a chance to talk about his experience in terms of starting to implement VHS. But just one issue that often comes up is the correct answer problem. You know, there's 1,000 different ways to go about doing this. Go about looking through a home. Certain things are contextualized. You know, the most common thing people say is it depends when you're training people. So we've spent a long time gathering expert feedback so that we can make sure that when we say this is the more right answer, that we're going off of more than just a small group of experts. It's a large group of experts. And then in addition, another consideration that we often talk about is when people are looking at developing technology-based approaches, they often have a wide amount of distance between the folks who code it and the folks who are the subject matter experts. We found that you need to have a highly integrated team to the point where the people who are coding it almost become the same part of the team as the social work educators. So I'm going to skip forward now and have Chris describe a little bit of his experience with the software.
Great, thank you, Matt. Hope everyone's doing well. My name's Chris Seiske. I'm the Director of Educational Technology and Instructional Design at CalSWEC, which is the California Social Work Education Center. We're hosted at UC Berkeley, but our work extends to about 20 campuses in California, the Schools of Social Welfare that we support the Title IV stipend program for. And also for in-service training of social workers throughout California. So I want to start off by saying that we are just on the cusp of piloting the virtual home simulation virtual reality from Utah. We've had kickoff calls with 10 campuses, and there's been great enthusiasm to move forward with VR. My hunch is we're going to have just under 10 of those campuses start in October. And by the way, at any point during this conversation, if you have questions, please do feel free to enter them in the Q&A, and we'd be happy to field them. I'd be able to answer things related to pre-implementation as opposed to post-implementation, along the lines of what led to our interest in virtual reality, why we're going with the VHS VR from Utah, as well as some of the considerations and issues that popped up along the way. And I'll try to keep this fairly brief and high level. I came on board in this capacity at CalSWAG in 2016. And pretty soon we were already hearing some interest in virtual reality and exploring what can and cannot be do in the virtual setting, in part because it is a safe environment for people, for students to get a sense of what a site visit would be like. And so we played around with various ways to deploy this, including building out a mock-up in articulate storyline branching scenario that had a caseworker sort of knock on a door, have an interaction with a client, and at any time could click a button to call upon the aid of a mentor and so on. But it was very limited. And we next, in October 2018, arranged for Accenture to show their headset-based VR solution at a all-staff meeting, basically a statewide meeting of the various regional training academies, and allowed the directors to try out what a VR experience would be like. So we gained more exposure and interest in VR at that time. And then we got word that Utah was working on something. We were very interested because this is being generated out of a university and from the PI, himself at the University of Utah for the Title IV stipend program. And so we established contact in August 2019. The first university that voiced interest was Fullerton, CSU Fullerton. And that kickstarted a process, basically templatized the process for us to use with other campuses, including setting up the confidential disclosure agreement the way it ought to be for California and so on. We have basically had individual kickoff calls with campuses, and then in August we had our first big sort of statewide call with Utah and the various campuses who are interested in doing the implementation this fall. And that's going really well, and we're really excited that we're going to have a chance to launch with the sort of version 2.0 of this VR, which is going to be ready by October 1st. So as far as some of the rationale as to why we went with the Utah solution, is, as I mentioned before, that it was being developed by School of Social Welfare and the university. Also, that it was employing the best and sound andragogical practices from what we were seeing in this space. So looking at the deliberate practices mentioned before with skills isolation, and also very much liked that Utah was building out a library, fuller comprehensive curriculum of components such that, for example, the VR scenario, the case in the VR actually leads into an online sim lab and so on. And as you just saw, they're also building out the virtual motivational interviewing app and so on. So there were all these component pieces that were growing larger over time and were evidence-based, were data-informed, and actually data improved. With the more data that they get into the product, the better that product becomes. So these were compelling factors. Also, there is the potential for customization if needed. For example, potentially down the road, setting up our own site visit and working in collaboration with Utah to shoot with their virtual reality camera the scenario and set it up under VHS VR, but specific to the needs of California. That is not something we've moved forward with, but it is something that we've had a number of conversations on the California side. Another thing is that this VR solution is deployable at scale, and that means that it is not reliant strictly on the use of VR headsets, which you can imagine this day and age is a little problematic, not only for the sharing, but also just that, getting the headsets to various people and having to wear a headset that somebody else has worn previously. Instead, this solution can be, at least initially, deployed via laptop. And so this means that we can deploy, whether it's 10 or 100 students who are going to go through it at a given campus, sort of doesn't matter. It's just a matter of providing them access to the files, and they on their laptops can do this. Eventually, though, we do want to, because of the nature of virtual reality, we are very eager and interested to see if the headset solution is going to work once we get past this new normal. Because of the nature of virtual reality being immersive. So I guess another big factor is that University of Utah is a pleasure to work with. And, I think of CalSWEC as exemplifying what we should be, how to go about partnership. And I got to say that Utah is a platinum standard. So I really thank them for this. And
the feeling is mutual, Chris.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. And so these were the rationale for moving forward with this solution at this time. And as you can imagine, with moving into the new normal, it just grew that enthusiasm to try out educational technologies. Considerations and issues that we've experienced along the way. Digital literacy is of concern, meaning that there are, on some level, some barriers that can be overcome, but that whenever you're introducing a new technology that is maybe slightly beyond the comfort zone of the intended audience for these students, we're so far so good. We haven't encountered any major issues with getting people tested when we're doing some faculty and staff testing, but we're going to we're sort of braced to deal with some digital literacy problems, even though Utah has done a very good job of putting together instructional guides for the instructor, for the students, and as well as an implementation guide. Also, as you can imagine, virtual reality experience is highly visual, and so for that reason, there have been a lot of question marks around conformance with ADA Section 508 regulations, and what the different campuses have as their criteria for meeting those regs. And so Utah put together a VPAT, a voluntary product accessibility template, to document the ways in which VHS VR is and is not accessible. And we're moving forward from there. It is, I would say that is one of the major concerns that we're hearing from the campuses, just because even though we've put the case of the nature of this technology being visual, we are working with the campuses to figure out how we can be as conformant as we can with ADA. Also, there have been questions about how the data is going to be used, and Utah has a ready answer for that around the de-identification of data. And one of the benefits that comes with deliberate practice, which is skills isolation, well, that could also be seen as an issue, meaning that in the VHS virtual reality software, you're not really, because it's so focused on identifying those risk and protective factors, you're not having the interaction with the parents or child. And so that is something that is addressed elsewhere. For example, in their online sim lab, which I've had the pleasure of watching a couple times now. But that's been something that's been brought up by the campuses as well. Like, when are those people skills going to be brought up if in this VR scenario there is no interaction with people? But there's an answer for that. The online sim lab is one way to do it. So I think that's it from me, and want to see if Utah has anything to chime in about, or if any of you watching this have questions. And if not, I'm going to turn it back to Utah.
Okay.
All right.
So in the interest of time, I'm just going to go over these last two slides real quick. But as Chris pointed out, we are starting with discrete skills, but we want to develop a library of skills. And one of the chief goals or priorities next is interactions with people. So, engaging caregivers, children, families. And then just to end, one of the things that made us interested in giving this webinar is it's a big goal to say that you would like to develop a library of skills to teach child welfare workers prior to entering the field. What we are hoping is that we can get partners and partners that can collaborate. In a sense, we have spent a long time developing a structure for incorporating deliberate practice, but this is too big of a lift to do alone. And so we've, as we've been working with other jurisdictions, we've talked about, hey, you got some homes that we could go into and film? Is there ways in which we can get, for example, in Montana, we were looking at could we film on an Indian reservation? And then in addition, having jurisdictions add in their own forms, add in their own vignettes, different things like that. And so I think it's kind of nice to end with a request for anyone who would be interested in collaborating, because the way we look at this is something that's developed that should be for all child welfare organizations to be able to access. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Chad for any closing thoughts.
I think you guys have wrapped it up quite nicely. I agree. I'll just reiterate this idea that, you know, so many of us have had good ideas in what is going well and how to develop our workforce. And we want not to have any of this developed in a silo. And so I'd just echo what's been said, and in collaboration with Cal Sweat Consortium through Chris and others in other states already having piloted this as well, is our interest in working together to make this tool better. So while it's still in development in early stages, and along the way there are many different aspects of research we tend to explore, implicit bias and comparison in skill acquisition with headset versus the PC or the laptop platform, several different aspects of collaboration that you can jump in on with us as well. So certainly open to those ideas.
And I just want to piggyback on something that Chad mentioned about ideas. One of the great things that Utah has put together is a list of ideas, and I know that they've reached out to me and other jurisdictions to see about adding to that document, because this virtual reality software can be used for things outside of or beyond simply an identification of risk and protective factors. You can also look at things like implicit bias. It can be used for evaluative purposes in addition to the training purposes. It is also a safe way for a new student, for example, to just get a feel for what it's like to go on a home visit.
It has been serving a bit as a realistic job preview. We do pre and post surveys that have asking them about their intention to go to work in child welfare. And on the pre, they're very much very varied across the scale of very much so to not at all. And on the post, they are more polarized to one of the other ends, as if it's helping them decide for sure, yeah, this is where I want to go, or absolutely not. So that's an interesting side thing we didn't anticipate.
So Chad, Brenda Lee has a question. Can you see the chat?
Yes, I can.
And
yes.
I do apologize, I have to skip out.
All right.
But Chad and Nicole and
No
Chris
worries.
are going to take it from here.
We're moved into the Q&A process now, so we'll address Brenda's question. Are you ever looking for additional VR technical software development? Who's developing the VR? Is it a team at the University of Utah? Yes, there are the tech crew, I'll call them, but they are formerly known as the Games and Applications Lab, part of our Entertainment, Arts, and Engineering department. And they are the ones that are using the platform Unity to develop this software. And we have a rapid or an agile development model with them, where we not only meet with them regularly as the subject matter experts to make sure tech crew and subject matter experts are all on the same page, but we're set up on an instant messaging chat forum where we have communication with them almost on a daily basis, so that their development goes in the direction that is most meaningful and is supported by the literature. And this is an important aspect because we know of several others who have developed this software, who have contracted with third-party entities, for example, and it can be really tricky. A third-party entity might take it and then they get to a certain developmental stage, come back, and if there's changes that need to be made, the costs can continue to grow. But an agile development model that we use with our in-house entertainment, arts, and engineering department has allowed us to be as fiscally responsible for the funding of this as possible without having to get them too far down a developmental lane. So I'm not sure, Brenda, if that answers your question. You're asking, are you looking for additional VR tech support or tech software development? Are you offering, or are you wondering if that's what we meant by collaboration? Because obviously, in a collaboration, if you have the tech crew, it certainly would be something to consider, an additional skill set to join the effort for sure. We'd be open to any collaboration of sorts, whether they be experts in the subject of child welfare or on the tech side. Any other questions at this point? Oh, sorry, Cole, were you going to say something? Okay. Okay, I don't know, Kira, it looks like maybe that might be it for questions then.
Yes, there are some comments coming in just expressing appreciation for the content you've shared, and I want to also express my appreciation for the content you've shared, Cole, Chad, and Christopher and Matt. This has been really, really great. We hope that those of you who are on the call and were able to join us in the moment are interested in the grand challenges and will check out our website. You will receive an email that contains a link to the recording so you can rewatch any portions that you might want to revisit. And we just thank you all again for your time for joining.
I want to say thank you to University of Maryland and your facilitation of this.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kira.
We'll close out and hope to see you on the next one.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.